Hello, I'm your host, Chris Crisitiello. Newton once had many farms. It was an agricultural community that could feed its residents with crops. And the beautiful agricultural views and vistas fed our yearnings for being part of the earth we live on. Even as Newton grew and developed, with mills and stores and homes and schools, there were still many farms. As late as the 1970s, 2 of Newton's largest farms were sold and developed into apartment complexes. Today, Angino Farm is Newton's last remaining farm. This is our last chance to save Newton's last farm. In October, the Newton Board of Aldermen will vote on appropriating Community Preservation Act funds to save Newton's last remaining farm. The Community Preservation Advisory Committee has already voted to recommend the funds. There is a lot of community interest and excitement about this project. This is John Rodman, Chair of Newton's Historical Commission. John, what can you tell us about the historical value of this farm?
Yeah, this is the last working farm in the city of Newton. It hasn't been in operational mode for quite some time, but farms like these were once very common on the south side of the city, and one by one they were chewed up and split apart to meet the housing needs of returning veterans. This is the last farmhouse that appears in its context of the farmstead with the open field in front of it and a barn. When the CPC legislation was in the process of being enacted, this site was one that sort of stood out among all others as being a prominent spot for the use of these funds for historic open space and affordable housing. This one is more of sociological import. It's certainly not a grand structure or fine art, but it is the last vestige of this aspect of Newton's history. In my letter to the urging the Community Preservation Committee to support this, I had indicated that the changeover of farmlands to subdivisions is at least as important in the history of the city as was the advance of the railroad in terms of changing the landscape on the north side of the city. So this really is the only place, the only opportunity that Newton will have to preserve this aspect of our heritage for the future. The important thing is that we react with the market now that this property is for sale, and so we have to sort of find our horse and get on it and not let the opportunity get away.
I'd like to introduce to you first a key figure in this Newton Conservators' intent to develop a working farm here. This is John Regeson, who's the chairman of the Angino Farm Committee. He's worked with other agents in the city, including the Community Farm Group, in the hopes of bringing about a reversal of the arrested farm here to restore it to life in honor of Jerry Angino.
When I first heard about this project, I was extremely excited, having come here with my mother when I was a kid and actually purchased tomatoes from Jerry Angino. And I thought it was really, really important to save this property, and not just the buildings and the historic landscape, but actually restore it to a working farm. Let me give you an update on where we stand right now in the process. The Newton Conservators they negotiated to purchase this land from the Angino family, and they put together a proposal which went before the Community Preservation Committee. And that proposal was to preserve the field as open space, permanently protect that as open space. A conservation restriction would go over the field. And the buildings, there would be historic preservation restrictions on the historic farmhouse and barn, so that the exteriors of those buildings would remain as they are. And then on top of that, to form a farm group to actually operate a nonprofit community farm on the site. Okay. And the Community Preservation Committee voted to recommend that the aldermen fund that project, and now we're getting ready. The next step is to go before the Board of Aldermen.
John, tell me, are there any other communities in eastern Massachusetts who've developed farms of this sort that you propose?
Yeah, Chris, absolutely. In fact, there's a very, very active community farming movement in Massachusetts. especially in eastern Massachusetts, where there's been so much development and people are really concerned about preserving farmland. And some examples, in Waltham, there's a community farm that's very successful. Landsake is one of the most famous community farms in the country, and that's located in Weston. Stearns Farm is not very much bigger than Angino Farm, and that's located in Framingham.
I was going to ask you, this is a somewhat smaller plot of land in comparison with some of those other farms. Do you think you can make a go of it here?
Yeah, we've been talking to a lot of farmers who have been helping us develop some plans for the farm and some budgets for the farm. And the way we envision it working, at least in the beginning, is there's something called community-supported agriculture. And what that is people buy shares up front in the beginning of the season, and then they're entitled to a share of the produce each week during the growing season, which is probably going to be, they'll start getting produce in May right into October. And often these shares are pretty big. Sometimes families will split a share. And we think we can sustain at least 60 shares right here. And what we're planning to do, hoping to do, is to partner with a larger farm that can grow some of the bigger crops like corn and pumpkins, another organic community farm, and that'll enable us to support even more folks. And let me add one other thing. It's very important, you know, we're not just going to be serving those 80 or 100 people who can purchase shares, because we're also committed to selling produce at the Cold Spring Park Farmers Market, and also there'll be a lot of volunteer opportunities and educational programs run on the farm.
I understand that with modern farming methods, you can have multiple crops in the course of one growing season. Is that what you have in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the farmers who work here in eastern Massachusetts, you know, are forced to deal with small space, you know, and they use that space very, very intensively. Community farming, you know, really combines three elements. You know, one is producing the crops. The second is education, and I'll say more in a second. And then the third is trying to do something in terms of feeding people in need and feeding the hungry. And we hope to have all three programs here.
I understand that there's been a great deal of community interest in this, and that the hearings that you've had on the Angino Farm have brought forth a lot of potential farmers. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really gratifying. It's been tremendous in terms of the number of people that have come forward to get involved in the project. And you know, as I mentioned, we're collecting pledges for people who are interested in purchasing a share of the agriculture produced here, and those shares are being sold for $500 a share, and we've already had 42 pledges to date of people who are interested in purchasing shares. And one thing that's really tremendously exciting about this whole project is that it meets many of the Community Preservation Act goals. You know, it's not just open space. It certainly is open space. It's 2¼ acres here, but it's also the historic preservation. The buildings are very significant. It's also this ability to provide this community housing for the farmer. So with all those pieces in place, I think it's just a really exciting project. This site is on the open space plan of the city as a very high priority for protection, and it's a very high priority for the Historical Commission as well.
John, thanks for all the work you've done. The Newton Conservators are enthusiastic, and there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm among the citizenry of Newton for the idea of maintaining this as a community farm. Thank you. You have worked on the farm yourself through all the years?
Yeah, all my life.
So you're the third generation on this farm?
Third generation.
Right. You're pleased, I expect, to see to realize that the Newton Conservators would like to keep it going as a farm and maintain as a farm.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good tribute to the Angino family.
I do remember working in the vegetable fields.
Everybody worked, young and old.
Now, right now it's planted in grass. How long ago did you stop having a full-fledged farm here?
Probably about 20 years ago.
But it would be nice to see a renewal of that.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
Great.
Tell me a little bit about Jerry. He worked in the city of Newton also in the school system,
yes,
as well as on this farm. And he was working with the school system for a number of years. Can you tell me a little bit more about him?
Jerry started his career out at the Day Junior High School as a industrial arts teacher. Wound up as superintendent of school attendance. I think he spent about 35 to 40 years with the city of Newton.
Jerry himself did a lot of the farm work as well as his school work?
It was really a labor of love for the whole family.
Yeah.
Jerry led the parade.
Yeah. Jerry, I wanted to ask you, when did you start living here on this farm?
Well, as far as I can remember, it was around 1943. My father went into the service, and my mother and father lived in Somerville at the time. My grandmother invited my mother back, and been here ever since.
I see. So your first memories here have to do with being on this land.
That's it.
I see. So you've in fact been here all your life.
Yeah. All my life.
Was your dad involved in any of the farming activity?
Oh yeah. There wasn't a person here that didn't work.
I see. So all three generations were
Everybody.
Involved in this farm.
Even my cousins, and I have quite a few cousins, they were here on Sunday. They worked when they came.
Jay, we're very pleased that you are interested in having this preserved as a working farm. This is Banita Schnell, a veteran of the Newton school system, has worked there for 32 years and was well acquainted with Jerry Angino. Tell us what you remember about Jerry.
He was the most intelligent, gentleman, forthright, dedicated counselor that I think I've ever known. He knew Newton, every inch of it. He knew where all the two-family houses were. He knew every child who didn't have a father, and he worried about them and felt he would try to do what he could for them. And there's a million people around that could talk about what he did for them. He loved this place. All of us bought tomato plants from him. They were the best. Nobody else's plants did as well or produced as many tomatoes as Jerry's. He sold flowers, zinnias, and people just came here and purchased them. And it was very hard when he decided to cut back. We really missed it terribly.
You're telling us the story of a fairly remarkable fellow, and the city of Newton should have a great debt of gratitude towards this man. And I think it's very fitting that this farm be continued as a farm in his memory.
Well, when I heard about it, I thought it was an absolute miracle because I've watched all the farms disappear and Newton being developed, every inch of it. And to save this, I think, is probably the best news that I've heard in years.
Hi, I'm Chris Crisitiello from the Newton Conservators, and here I am at Ledgebrooke, the wonderful community near the Angino Farm. I'm going to go in to say hello to some of the people there.
Hey, good to see you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Gene Rubin.
Good morning, Gene. I'm Chris Crisitiello from
Chris, I'm the chairman of the board here at Ledgebrooke, and we're excited about this whole project, so we're glad to have you come along.
Will the development of the community farm in the Angino Farm area have any impact upon this place next door, which is so beautiful?
Well, I think it's going to really provide a plus for the people that are living here and for people driving by, because we're going to really improve the appearance of the site. For example, getting the vinyl siding off of the barn and restoring it to the shingles that used to be on there, and we're going to have neat row crops and flowers. So I think it'll actually be an improvement. And we are concerned about being good neighbors.
Now let's see how an operating community-supported farm actually works in another town. Ted Kuklinski of the Newton Conservators is out at Stearns Farm in Framingham.
We're here at the Stearns Farm in Framingham, Massachusetts. It's a community-supported agriculture farm, and we have some of the shareholders here.
This is my third year as a sharer with the farm, and we really enjoy the entire process of coming to helping in the beginning of the season, tending to the fields, putting our little time in, getting to know all the little plants, and then when it comes harvest time, it's just great to come here once a week and get beautiful, locally grown organic produce and cook it up. I'm not a farmer. I'm not even much of a gardener. But what's important to me is giving my family food that is locally grown and not treated with pesticides, and also just to have this beautiful space to come to and enjoy.
It's just a nice place to be. It's different from the urban or suburban areas which I live in. I started as a nonprofit activist type, and I got into urban planning. I worked for the city of Springfield, and then I just craved, there was just a lot that I didn't know still. I was working on great issues, but I really just wanted to literally get down in the dirt and learn a skill. And I'd loved being outdoors and doing things outdoors since I was little, but I didn't really know I knew how to hike, I didn't know how to do things with the earth, so I just craved that. And I looked for a farm to work on, and I found out that there were a ton out here, and that they hire young people, and they take you on as apprentice, and they train you so that you could farm organically too. It's such a neat way to get people in touch. It's different than a hike. You have to understand the soil, you have to see what the soil can produce, you have to understand balance between pests, all things that we call pests.
Now,
You usually have one person who has the expertise to decide, and they spend a lot of their time over the winter planning crop rotations, what replaces what, so that the soil gets the best work out of it. And the community gets involved by assisting the farmer, basically. They are the modern farm crew. They're the workers.
do you think the CSA, community-supported agriculture concept, could work in Newton?
I do think the CSA model could work in Newton. It would be a smaller CSA, and it would be supplemented with, as all community farms are, the education and the grant writing and the other programs that would happen on a community farm, which is basically what makes up a community farm.
How many shareholders are in a farm of this size here?
There's 150 here.
Okay, and how many shareholders do you think Angino Farm could support?
We'd safely assume that the farm could support about 60 members, 60 shareholders. I hear the array of stories of people who are coming to the farm. I've had one person say, I can't believe people will come out and work for 12 hours for cheap vegetables, which was a total shocker to me to hear that that's why they're coming. And then there's the people who just are somehow into, like, they crave a community, and they, maybe they're moms with kids, and instead of going to the park and having them swing on the swing, they come here, and the kids can, like, get involved in the children's garden, run around the fields, see some bugs. But you get a total array. People who just crave the vegetables and want good produce and know that this is where to come to get quality produce, and people who want part of the bigger picture. And it's kind of scary at first because, I mean, I came from a kind of conservative suburban background. Community to me was school, and there wasn't a lot of this gathering space. You know, what is a gathering space in the suburbs? This is a great way to do it. It's a great way to collect people, get them outside, get them in an element that they're not, that's not quite cut and dry, that they're not totally used to, and it breaks down some barriers. You meet a lot of different types of people here.
We're here with Kathy Hawkins. Kathy is the farm manager for the Stearns Farm in Framingham, Massachusetts, and which is a CSA, and we're going to get a little bit of perspective on her take on the whole community-supported agricultural movement.
From the 50s to the 90s, this farm was run by a woman named Penelope Turton. She died in the late 90s. And before she died, she put together the CSA concept to keep the farm going. It's very different than a supermarket where you just take what you want. Here, they've paid up ahead of time. I put on the stand what the share is for that day when they're picking up each week. And that's what they take home, and then we give them cookbooks and all kinds of ideas, and they share ideas out in the field. It has been a really remarkable way to do agriculture. It gives them a chance to work in the soil, to get to know how we plant broccoli, to watch that broccoli. They come the next week and check it out, see how it's doing. When they eat broccoli at home from the broccoli they planted here, they have a connection. We work with the community because that's what we have. We also have a children's garden on the over here where oftentimes when families with young children come to pick up, they're here for 2 or 3 hours.
Kathy, who actually owns the farm here?
We lease this land from the Sudbury Valley trustees. So the land is owned by them. It's their conservation land. We lease it for a nominal amount each year, but the structure is a nonprofit. We do have an orientation at the beginning of the year for all the new members to let them know kind of the lay of the land, to give them a tour of the farm and our practices so that they understand it better. Because with CSA members, it could be that they drove in, picked up their vegetables, and drove out. In fact, many CSAs that aren't gifted enough or aren't lucky enough to be here in a metropolis, they have to do it that way. They have to, they're way out somewhere, and they have to fill boxes, and the boxes get shipped into town, and then people get here, because people have to come here, we want their experience here to be very positive for them. And so that's the orientation gives them that sense too of how we do things and why we do them the way we do them, so that when they're eating a carrot, they have an idea of what process we went through to get that carrot to the stand. I start planting in February in the greenhouse. The sharers can start working the 15th of April. The 15th of April is when the work for sharers begin on those 2 days. People start picking up the 15th of June, and they pick up around the 15th of June, depends on the season, the weather, but mostly they pick up the 15th of June until the end of October, so it's about 20 weeks. We have a brochure that we send out in in late winter, and it has a list of all our vegetables and when people would expect to see them on the stand. And my job is to coordinate that, so that over the winter months I lay out my crop plan, how much I'm going to grow of what, and when, depending upon when we want it at the stand. So for instance, we want carrots at the stand most of the season, so I plant them 6 different times and tend them 6 different plantings and harvest them 6 different plantings throughout the season. Lettuce we sow every week, and we put in the field every week because we have it on the stand every week. Tomatoes we plant once, and we plant early, late tomatoes, but mainly generally around the same time. So the crops that are the cool crops in the spring, and what you see that are the local market in the spring, all the mostly salad stuff to clean out your system from the winter. That's all. That's what we come on with first. Then right now, in the last 2 weeks, we started with what are called the nightshades, which are the peppers, eggplants, and tomatoes. And those are a big hit. We have a lot of those. Before that, for a couple of weeks, we had a lot of summer squash, zucchini, cucumbers. So we still have those, and we're still bringing them through. We still have lettuce, which we started from the beginning, and now we're adding more. And by the end of the season, we've got a huge amount of food. So we say that we provide between 5 and 15 pounds a week of vegetables here at Stearns. And so at the beginning of the season, it's probably closer to 5 and a little more, but by the end of the season, it gets very heavy, especially when you get in the fall, you have the winter squash, you have the potatoes, you have the onions, the pumpkins.
Welcome to Stearns Farm on a Friday CSA Pickup Day. We're in the middle of our regular afternoon pickup, where half of our membership comes today and they pick up their share of this week's produce. So behind me is the pickings, what everyone gets. There's a blackboard that tells you what your share is. You get a head of lettuce, 4 pieces of some sort of summer squash, 2 pounds of tomatoes, which is our newest thing on the list. And besides that, there's a ton of stuff that we have people pick themselves out in the field. So there's people out there, people in here, everywhere. They're all over the farm today.
I'm talking this morning with Leah Postman and her daughter Hannah about the prospects of a community farm at Angino Farm. And I'd like to ask Leah, what is her interest in the idea of a farm, and has she had any experiences with this herself or in her family?
Well, my interest is multifaceted and comes from a lifetime of being an environmental educator, and my interest in this, preserving Angino Farm for the future of Newton, is that it is our very last chance to preserve the long history of farming in this community, because it's the last farm. So I'd like to continue to see it farmed and have it be more available for current residents and future generations to see what can happen when you plant a seed, and what that process is like and what it tastes like in the end, and to have the opportunity to experience that, which is getting rarer and rarer when most of our food comes from at least 1,700 miles away. That's the current average in this country, and is cellopacked by the time it reaches us.
We belong to a organic CSA in Dover, which is run by Chris Yoder, who actually farmed with Jerry Angino for a few years. And so that's really great, and I'm glad that they offer that for other kids too. Well, the program for middle schoolers, which Landscape Farm offers, each summer they've been doing it for a long time. I did for 1 week, and each week has like a theme, a focus. You work on the farm in the morning and harvest and plant and that sort of thing. And then in the afternoons, later on, you can work on the idea of your theme. And the week I did was themed alternative energy and wind power and solar energy and those sort of things. And we made windmills and solar ovens, and it was really cool. I liked, especially when we got to harvest the carrots. I count myself very lucky to have been able to have this opportunity of the farm in Dover that we belong to as CSA members, to work there and farm there and get my fingers dirty. It's just dirt under your fingernails. It's a feeling that you don't get in your science classroom. You can ask your science teacher, sure, you know, are carrots sweeter when you leave them out a while, or are they when you pull them straight from the ground? But that's something that you can't really tell in words. It's something that you find in a taste, in your tongue, in your hands, and actually being there and doing it. And I think it would be a wonderful thing for other kids to be able to get that experience. And I hope that the Angino Farm can be preserved and that it will be offered to many other people to come.
I hope those of you who have been watching this program have enjoyed it. This is your chance to help save Newton's last remaining farm. To get more involved, contact friends of Angino Farm at www.communityfarm.info. John Rexon, who you saw on this show, will be glad to hear from you. For more information about the Newton Conservators programs to preserve open space in Newton for public use and enjoyment, contact www.newtonconservators.org. This program will be repeated for a month on Tuesdays, 10:30 a.m., Wednesdays, 10 p.m., Thursdays at 4 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., and Saturdays at 10 a.m.